Hey guys, how are you? I hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review. This movie is a science fiction film from the UK, English language, released in the year 2014, directed by Tom Green, and this film is called Monsters, Dark Continent. So Monsters, Dark Continent is the sequel to the Monsters that came out a few years ago. Basically, this is Earth that has been besieged by infected zones. Now, these infected zones consist of these massive aliens who are creating havoc upon Earth, and the population are trying to exterminate these infected zones. So in the second film, you got it set in the Middle East. Now, the Middle East have a lot of infected zones, and so the Allied forces are trying to wipe them out, and at the same time trying to wipe out insurgents who are using the monsters as a distraction in order to conduct their attacks. So this regiment of soldiers, they're very close-knit. It's their first tour, so they don't know what to expect, but they're going to be very soon thrust into the horrors of war, and they realise they're way out of their depth, and so if they want to get back home to their families, they're going to have to use everything they know about trust, bravery, and basically the sense of loss in order to try and combat what is about to be besieged upon them. So whether or not they can survive this onslaught and get back to their families is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Monsters, Dark Continent. The thing that Monsters, Dark Continent and the first Monsters film does very well is that it shows you so much more than just a straight out monster film. It's got a very strong sense of realism inside a very science fiction world. So it's got two sort of senses of worlds clashing towards each other, and it does give you something a little bit different. So if you go in there expecting a typical monster film like Independence Day, where it's about humans versus aliens and it's a battle for survival, you might be a little bit disappointed, because this movie does hit you on very much a thematic sort of viewpoint and very symbolic viewpoint, and it showcases who is the real monster. Is it the monster that we associate with everything we fear, with massive tentacles, with big teeth, growling, and everything that you say a monster is, the thing that hides under your bed, that thing that really scares you? Or is it in fact the inner self? Is it the human beings that are the real monsters? And so the monsters in this film aren't necessarily used in a stereotypical fashion, a very traditional fashion. It's used to really symbolise that difference, and it's there to show you the sadness and the pain and suffering that one human being can inflict upon another human being. And so that's the thing I thought was so interesting about Monsters, the first film, is that it does show you that yes, we've painted something that does look very intimidating, does look very scary, but the scariness is actually coming from someone you can actually associate with. And that to me is a lot more scary, and I thought it's very relevant to today's society, especially in the Middle East, where it's being besieged by ISIS, and ISIS doing things that are very inhumane. And so you can't really differentiate between the monster you see in the background in this film and the monster you're actually seeing within a person. And that to me was much more of an emotional sort of impact that the film has, and a much more powerful impact. So the monsters are used very intelligently in this film, and I do have some problems with the way they were used, but I thought for the majority of it, it does showcase that warfare in this film is the true evil, is the true monster, and all of a sudden the monsters at the start of the film that were so intimidating don't feel as intimidating as the person that you see in front of you. And so I think that is the scariest part, is that humans are capable of doing so much more inhumane things upon each other than they can upon something that, as I said, you associate with a traditional monster. So I thought the cinematography in this film was absolutely fantastic. The setting of the Middle East was very symbolic, and at the same time it was a superb setting at creating something that does saturate through the screen. I thought it was very saturated colouring. It actually makes you feel thirsty just watching it, so you can actually really experience what these guys are going through. I thought the actions choreography was absolutely fantastic. It's a very brutal film, very in your face, and all the carnage, as I said, happens within the human beings, one human being to another human being. And so at the start of the film you're kind of initially thinking these monsters are going to create all the havoc, but as I said, the monsters aren't really in it too much. They're in the background, and it just showcases that sort of difference. And so I thought that, as I said, it does have that strong, very realistic heart within the science fiction world. So the cinematography, absolutely fantastic. The score was very well done. I thought it was very haunting and beautiful at the same time. There were some scenes in this film that were absolutely beautiful involving the monsters that you don't associate with beauty, and so it's everything that is you know about standard monster films, and it's turned upside down. You don't really know who the bad guy is, and when you start to think about it, it starts to send a chill down your spine. So it's a very chilling film for me in a very subtle way. I thought the ending, right at the end, it does make you think very much. It's very powerful and a very sad film, so it's not a movie that's going to make you feel good. So I really liked the friends in this film. I thought the friends, the chemistry was there. There was a lot of banter at the start of the film, and so when the bad things happened, you could actually sense that authentic loss that they were having when they were screaming. You know, the acting was actually fairly well done. So yeah, there was a lot to like about Monsters Dark Continent, but be careful, because if you're into the standard sort of monster film, you might not like it. But unfortunately for me, there were some problems to this film. Now, the number one problem is the fact that it does go for 119 minutes. Now, I don't think it really outstayed its welcome. I just didn't think it knew how to really pan out to be an overall rewarding experience. Now, what I mean by that is that at the start of the film, you've got the input that these friends love each other, because it's flogged over your head time and time again very quickly. You know, whether it's a blatant sort of dialogue saying, you know, I love you, man, or, you know, they're always hugging. It's very blatant as to the directors trying to force feed that these people are very close. And because it's not happening as naturally as you want it to, you can kind of disconnect yourself a little bit. You can kind of say, okay, these are characters in a film as opposed to a character that I can genuinely care about. And so you've got at the start of the film this guy leaving his newborn baby behind to go to war. And so all those moments are very blatant, and I thought that the 119-minute runtime, the start of the film could have been dragged out a little bit, is because the rest of the film, it feels like there are moments that are a little bit of a filler. And so because it doesn't really feel like it's going anywhere, that sort of moment in time, it could have been used at the start of the film to drag it out a little bit more naturally. And so that's not a massive problem, but it was a problem that I actually noticed, and it didn't really hit me as hard when the bad things happened as it really could have if it had a little bit more time and attention to those minor details at the start. Another problem I had with the film is that the interest, the monsters engulf you in the interest in this film. It's basically monsters. That's what's going to draw you into the movie. And the monsters look absolutely fantastic. The CGI is absolutely phenomenal. They look very authentic. They look very scary. But unfortunately, they're very much in the background for the majority of the film. Now, as I said, their symbolic sort of gesture in the film is very interesting, but I felt something so you know, interesting in its sort of presence as far as the monsters are concerned. They were very underused. They were not utilised to its full potential. So because you've got all the interest in these monsters, you know, we've all seen war films. We've all seen films that depict the horrors of war, and that, you know, what one person can do to another person. Yes, we've seen that, okay. But the movie builds itself on more of a war drama as opposed to those monsters. And because those monsters look so good, because the monsters are so interesting, the story behind the monsters is so interesting, you want more from that. But in the end, what you get is much more of a war drama, and it's a war drama that has been done before, but the only difference here is that it's interweaved with monsters in the background. But because those monsters in the background pretty much stay in the background, you can't help but feel at the end of the film you wanted a bit more from that, and it could have given the movie a little bit more of a theatrical sort of thrilling aspect that I thought was lacking in some areas. And then, as I said, I've already gone through the long run time as far as the duration of the film is concerned. As I said, if it polished itself up here and there, it could have been better. But if it was a 90-minute film and it stayed from what it was trying to do, as for example, that very quick sort of introduction to these characters, if it was cut down to 90 minutes, I thought a lot of that filler would have been stamped out, and it would have made it a much more fluent film as far as continuity is concerned. But overall, if you are a fan of science fiction films and you want something a little bit different that will actually grip you in reality and make you think about the world we live in today, Monsters Dark Continent is definitely one I would go out there and say give it a go, and as a result of that, I'm going to give this film 3.5 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.